then decided to pursue a law degree because I thought that practicing law would give me the greatest opportunity to change the lives of people of color and those who are down and out. So I wanted to be the next Thurgood Marshall, Johnny Cochran, William Kunstler. And so in the fall of 2001, I enrolled immediately in the University of Michigan Law School. And so I need to be honest with you here. Law school was not for me. Or maybe I was burnt out after 4 years of undergrad, who knows? That's neither here nor there. I struggled a lot to adjust to a new way of thinking and the fact that I wasn't one of the most successful in my class. In fact, I was probably in the middle of the pack if I'm going to be generous. I probably should have dropped out, but my pride and the thought of returning to my parents' place in Bloomington, Indiana, and having people asking me why I dropped out deterred me. And so I persisted. But then things took a turn for the better in my second year when I was coached by a man by the name of Frank Wu, a then visiting professor from Howard University Law School. And Frank, I'm happy to tell you, is now the chancellor of the University of California at Hastings. And so Frank really had a major impact on the way that I approached law school and life in general. My most positive memories of law school were Frank, the assistant law school dean Charlotte Johnson, my law school classmates from California because they were crazy, drinking, smoking cigars, and playing basketball. That's it. Seriously, that's it. So 3 years later, in a ton of debt that continues to haunt me, I graduated from law school. And I'm pretty sure you guys know where I'm headed with this. I realized I didn't want to practice law. So I had this law degree, tons of debt, and no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And so this began my existential crisis of figuring out what job or career I really wanted to pursue. I mean, I knew I wanted to use my law degree to do as much good as possible, but I didn't know how to do it. Meanwhile, my classmates were working for law firms, judges, and not-for-profits. It seemed like they had everything figured out. But it was by accepting that I didn't want to practice law that I ended up working with WFP. Long story short, a mentor who worked with WFP invited me to join him for a year. And so several months after graduating law school and with no idea, none, of what I was embarking on, I ended up in Rome, Italy, where I worked in WFP's headquarters. Not bad. So over the next 16 years, I've traveled and worked in more than 30 countries, held positions that range from managing offices in Zambia on the borders of Angola and Malawi, to serving as a government donor relations officer in Rome, to HR officer in Rome, to managing a team of communications, external relations, and reports officers in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. These positions have taught me how to manage and lead people, how to effectively communicate in terms of writing and speaking, to better understand people, and to think strategically. Along the way, I've had the pleasure of meeting tons of great people, and I've developed amazing friendships with people from every walk of the world, some of whom are actually on today's call. Now, here's the thing. Remember what I said earlier. I've undertaken major life changes when there's a crisis. So the law school thing, that was a crisis. Well, but the next crisis took place when I served as special assistant to our former WP executive director. So for 4 years, I worked with her, and I was responsible for helping to develop global advocacy and fundraising activities that raised more than $100 million. I oversaw our corporate ambassadors program, which leverages global celebrities like Michael Kors, Drew Barrymore, Christina Aguilera to promote our work. I traveled extensively with the executive director to places like South Sudan and Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis. I had the chance of meeting CEOs, heads of states, celebrities, refugees, orphans, and countless others. I think you guys know where I'm going with this. I was doing all these things with a limited amount of staff and little to none budget. It's like being asked to make a 5-course meal with $20. Of course, it's possible, but it takes a lot of imagination and effort to pull off. And while I was successful, I eventually burnt out and took 5 months off. And when I say I burnt out, I burnt out. I couldn't sleep. I was drinking way too much. I was constantly stressed. And I experienced numerous physical ailments that I'm sure you do not wish to know. So in the fall of 2016, I left my apartment in Rome and returned to my parents' place in Bloomington, Indiana for those 5 months. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I was embarrassed to acknowledge that I was burnt out. I felt like I wasn't strong enough and that people would think less of me as a result. But it was during this time away from work that I started paying closer attention to the connection between my mind and my body. I noticed how both responded to thoughts of work or to colleagues. I noticed that I had no outlet for releasing my stress. I realized just how few close friends I actually had. And I thought about the fact that I hadn't looked forward to doing something that I truly liked in a long, long time. And so I made a list of things that I wanted to do for myself, and I committed to accomplishing them during my time away from work. So you might be wondering, what exactly did I do? I'm going to tell you. First, I traveled to Colombia for 10 days, the country, not the university. I took motorcycle lessons and earned my license. I developed closer relationships with friends and family. And once I returned to Rome, I pursued my interest in men's fashion and actually completed a fashion design course and took 6 months of classes, of sewing classes with an Italian tailor. I even learned how to make men's suits and pants. And at some point during those 5 months, I even thought about becoming a tailor myself. And it was during these 5 months away from work that I became more aware of myself and my needs and began to put them first. So you're probably wondering, and I get if you are, what does all of this have to do with COVID and the pandemic and what we're talking about today? As Falame mentioned, I'm in Rome. And as you know, Italy is one of the most hardest hit countries in the world. There are approximately 90,000 positive cases reported. Nearly 30,000 people have died. And Italy's economy is expected to shrink by over 9% this year, a percentage greater than any year. I'm gonna repeat that, any year since the global depression of the 1930s. For nearly 3 months, millions of Italians, foreigners, and my fellow expats have self-quarantined in our homes. And up until this week, our movements were restricted to within 200 meters of our home and to visits to the nearest grocery store or pharmacy, contingent upon us wearing masks and having a government form stating the reason for our movement. And so I've used this period once again to reevaluate my life, my values, and my priorities. And so here's what I've learned. I want to do work that is meaningful to me and that must take chances that make me feel uncomfortable and may not necessarily lead to success. I've learned that so much of what I've said and done in the past was to please others, and that ultimately impacted my abilities to connect emotionally with them. And speaking of emotions, I've learned that many of us crave emotional connection with others, that there's no substitute for a genuine connection in which we are seen and heard fully. And I've learned to appreciate that so much of what I purchased, clothes, electronics, books, you name it, right? It wasn't because I needed them. It was because I was trying to fill a void, an emotional void. I've also learned to appreciate the importance of vulnerability and opening up to others, like I'm doing right now, as if this is a therapist appointment. And I've learned the importance of listening, not just hearing, but listening to what people say. And so it's that last point that's really important, because in the absence of face-to-face contact, we must pay closer attention to the words we use, the pauses and spaces of silence, facial cues and expressions when we're on FaceTime or Zoom. My real challenge, though, will come in the weeks and months ahead when life returns to some semblance of normal. And by normal, I mean when we can go to stores and restaurants, when we can meet with friends and have a drink, and when we can plan our vacations. It's often easier for us to think conceptually or hypothetically about our beliefs and convictions than it is to actually act on them. It'll be difficult, I admit, but I'll make a concerted effort to apply what I've learned to my everyday life. These processes of self-evaluation and reprioritization of our values, of our beliefs, and our needs are fundamental principles of self-leadership. You guys may know of Peter Drucker. Peter was a famous management consultant. And he once said that, quote, being a self-leader is to serve as chief, captain, or CEO of one's life, unquote. My friends, we live in a world in which we constantly try to shape and influence external factors in order to bring us closer to our goals and objectives. But how often do we actually focus on ourselves? I personally believe that we could see better results if we spent more time on ourselves and less time on those external factors. So changing our focus allows us to flourish as mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, partners and friends, students and administrators. Changing our focus allows us to align our values and strengths with our purpose. And changing our focus allows us to get the best out of others by focusing on what's most important to them. Developing a better sense of self is incredibly grounding, and it helps you to navigate difficult situations with much less stress and to process negative emotions because, well, you have a higher level of emotional intelligence. Self-leadership, however, doesn't happen overnight, and it takes effort on our part, but the results are worth it. So here's my call to action, right? I realize it's very, very, very easy and even logical for us to view the pandemic as a negative event, right? Millions of people are going to lose their jobs. Once promising employment prospects are going to shrivel. And the health crisis will persist until a vaccine is discovered. Bad news, I get it. I understand it. And so for many of us, our self-images have been destroyed in the process or negatively impacted by this pandemic. We defined ourselves by our accomplishments, our titles, our wealth, our ownership of things. And for some of us, or actually for many of us, the pandemic has taken that identity away from us. However, it's in this moment, I believe, that we must challenge our beliefs and grow. We must grow if we're to succeed in this brand new world that will soon emerge. So in closing, I ask you to engage in self-leadership and to take stock of what's most important to you. After all, it's those people who possess the self-awareness, the agility, and the adaptability who will ultimately thrive, not just survive, in this new world. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rashad. So inspiring, and I appreciate your vulnerability and the ability to connect and share so much. And so, we have a break in a few moments, but I'd like to open up to the community to share their thoughts about what was said and anything that resonated with you that was a major heart flutter or something that made you say, ah. So if you would, if you have a comment, feel free to take this time to share your thoughts and to Rashad or any questions that you might have for Rashad.
I had a comment.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, Rashad. Thank you. This was really great. One of the things, I'm a teacher, I'm a high school teacher. And so I teach English, and we've been needing to move from building teaching to online, right? And so one of the things that a lot of my students have really been struggling with, just trying to figure this out. You know, some of my seniors, you know, whether they're going to graduate, family situations. And so I challenged them, as I challenged myself, to reimagine. And I actually got that from watching the Toni Morrison movie. Mm-hmm. And I had a bunch of other friends to Y'all need to watch that movie. But when Sonia Sanchez said that we need to really reimagine, it resonated with me. And so looking at this definition, and I like Peter Drucker, looking at self-leadership, this is something that not only do we have to worry or deal with ourselves, but we also have to pass this down to the young people, because as Dr. Wendy said before, you know, we really have to acknowledge what we're doing and how we're seeding into our young people. So I really appreciate, you know, your call to action, and all of us to challenge our beliefs, but even to remember young people, how we help them to challenge their beliefs of, oh, you know, getting the good job and having the best degrees and having things and stuff, but challenging them to what do you really want and what will really make you happy. So I just appreciated it, and I wanted to add that comment.
Thank you. And everything you said also resonated.
Thank you. Other comments?
I appreciate the self-inventory that you've suggested. And of course, I try to do that on a daily basis. And whether I have time or not, I think it's really critical to do that. You know, some things that come up aren't always, you know, where I was hoping to go, and may not for the moment make me feel better. But I think that that whole process is really critical to growing, and especially now. And the one question I have is, there's so much information to react to. How do you suggest that we go through that information purposively? You know, that we can find not only just stop, you know, I mean, you know, some of these models I've read about what's about to unfold here in the United States, and with the accompanying press to open up different states, is got me a little bit worried. And so I let fear take hold of me again. And I have to stop and say, you know, wait a minute, I'm just reacting to that information. Do you have any kind of insights into how to respond to that information with purpose and intention? Could you just say a little bit more about that process for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it comes back down to how I want my life to be, right? And by that, what I mean is, what are those core values that really guide me in my day to day, and even my long term. So when we first heard about the pandemic, and particularly here in Italy, I'm not gonna lie to you, I was scared, right? As my friends would say, I was scared, and and so I was worried about interacting with people. I was worried about my neighbors. I was worried about my parents. I was worried about friends, you know, everything. But what helped me was realizing that I couldn't control that, right? What I could control was keeping myself out of as much harm as possible, wearing a mask, wearing gloves, going out with little frequency, right? But I could also control how I saw it. And so I've told myself that I was going to use the situation to its full benefit, right? So working from home has given me the chance to become more effective and more productive. So that was one way, was taking this moment of working from home to become more productive and effective. I also made a vow to connect with friends and family, right? Falame, and many others, right? So again, it was a conscious decision based on the circumstances and based on these values and thoughts and beliefs that guided me, that led me to do that. I knew I wanted to remain physically active and healthy. So even though I was unable to go outside to run, I still managed to work out and exercise inside the house. So again, that value of remaining healthy guided my choice of working out, and so on and so forth, eating healthy. And so I guess my advice to you, to answer your question succinctly, is think about your values. What really guides you, right? What's important to you, and let that then kind of steer the information that you review or that you read. Let it influence your interactions with people. Let it influence what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, Rashad,
Thank
thank you very much for that. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Rashad, for that very elaborate talk. And I appreciate it because it was your life experience. So it was not from the books, but it actually what happened. You see that that's a great courage. I can't do it, at least to say what I am. My question is, you said instead of paying attention or concentrating on the external factors, these crises give us a chance to look on ourselves, you see, versus external factors. But you see, that's a very, very difficult thing.
Mhm.
Self-correction, I think, is the most difficult thing. So how do you achieve, it should not be just restricted, how do you achieve that shifting of focus from external factors to your own world, to your own universe? Do you go like Buddha for 40 years and sit under a tree and meditate? Or, I mean, do you wait for a crisis like Corona to shift, make your focus change? I mean, and then not only that, but how do you adapt it as an attitude? What do you do? Do you do meditation, or you do like you take a notebook and you write it down like goals and mission? I mean, that how would you do that transition from being affected too much by external factors to your own self?
So I've had the benefit of therapy. So that's also made a world of difference, right? And she has helped to move the focus from the external to the internal. So that's helped tremendously. In the absence of that, though, I do a lot of meditation. And this goes back to one of the points I raised in my discussion, which is I listen to myself. And that's something that I know I've not done very well in the past. And so I think that when we listen to ourselves, the truth starts to come out, right? So for instance, is listening to how your body reacts if you read something about the U.S. economy and how it's going to go down, right? How does your body react to that, right? Or it's a call from your girlfriend or significant other. How does your body respond to that? It's starting to pay attention to those small but yet important things. And I think that will help you to remain focused, right? Because I think we often have a tendency of just going with the flow. At least I know I have, and I do. And so I overlook things that are actually taking place within me, both physically as well as mentally. And I just kind of say, well, that's just part of the deal versus, no, this is not good. And so that allows me to self-correct. And it's this desire to maintain that sense of equilibrium, right? That constant, neither going too high, neither going too low, which is facilitated by yoga, meditation, exercise, the relationships with friends and family, that allows me to maintain that behavior. And of course, it vacillates, at least for me. Like I come across as like really having my stuff together. I don't. I don't. I really don't. But I also give myself, and I think this is also very important, I give myself permission to mess up.
Rashad, I just want to thank you for giving us insight that you have given us. You know, as your little cousin, it's been great looking up to you and growing up. And I have my daughter here, Brielle, she's 10 months. And, you know, even though she doesn't really know what she's listening to, she's hearing greatness and hearing all these great responses. And when we talk about leadership, for me, I am learning how to give myself grace. And during the COVID and working from home, I just finished up my second master's while working from home and being a daycare provider. I have to give myself some grace and love on myself. So using essential oils to give back love to balance me out, because everything that is happening can get you off balance. So you made some very good points, and I think our action steps next is to continue to apply what we've taught ourselves during COVID. So thank you so much, Rashad.
Thank you.
I wanted to call on a few people, if that's okay. I'm gonna just name 5. Penny, Jamila, Steve, Lori, and Christina. Hopefully in that order, but if not, then we'll just see. So Penny, comments, questions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rashid. I loved hearing your story and relating to how this has really helped you to unfold into a better version of yourself. I work with young children out in nature, and it's really important to me that we connect with nature. Mm-hmm. But that piece about tapping into their body's wisdom is really relevant, and just remembering that and bringing awareness through questioning. You know, how are you feeling? Where do you feel it in your body? I think is to me it's really exciting, because it's something that's been a bit of a journey for me also. And yeah, so thanks very much.
Thank you.
It's great.
Thank you.
Jamila?
Yes, hi, Jamila here. I'm usually like to be in the background, and that's why my camera's off, but I'm listening. So Rashad, I really appreciate your presentation. I took away some things as you were speaking, and I was kind of journaling. I was like, you know, you were saying, you know, taking inventory of yourself. And I'm like, well, how do you know when you're burnt out, when you've been raised in crisis, right? So like this pandemic is happening, but as a survivor of the foster care and juvenile system, this is normal, right? And I'm a leader, so I'm an executive director for a nonprofit that serves girls and women of color through behavioral health services. So while we're having this healthcare crisis, mental health is, you know, it's a lot going on right now. But again, this is my normal. So I'm like, how do I identify internally my burnout? You know, so I'm telling all my clinicians, work-life balance. And I'm like, 2 monitors up, working 7 days a week. And so I'm just like, how do you know you're burnt out when this is your normal? And I believe I quoted you properly. Let me, and correct me if I'm wrong. It says, did you say, let your values guide you and how you lead?
Exactly.
Okay, that's powerful. So thank you. But again, it goes to the part of like, well, my personal values is leading me to do this work. So when do I take time for me? And so still trying to figure that out, you know, 18 years later in this work. So thank you.
Jamila, if I can, just to jump in real quickly, what you're mentioning is tough, right? Because that is the norm for you and for many people. And I don't have an answer. I'm not going to even pretend to know the answer, right? What I can say is this, you know how people say that, I'm not going to say anything, but then say, I'll actually say something. So I'm going to say something, and it's this. It might be helpful to see how you feel if you move yourself beyond your current situation. In other words, what happens if you go to the park? Or what happens if you're around certain people? And kind of let that determine where your stress points are, or where you're having issues, or whatever it is. And maybe that can help you to recalibrate, right? Or to identify what's really going on.
Yeah.
What's really going on.
Thank you.
Thank you. And keep up the great work. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rashad. What really, a couple of things really resonated for me. One, I like your recognition of the plan as being emergent, and your your willingness at a certain point to abandon the plan and conceding it not as a failure, which much of our training and socialization, I think, brings us all up to recognize, well, if you abandon the plan, then you failed to execute the plan. But of course, the plan is only authentic for as long as it's authentic, and then continuing to pursue it is inauthentic. And the plan needs to be, I think, reevaluated and adjusted sometimes on a daily level when we're going through times of upheaval like we are now. And also recognize, I used to think of myself as a late bloomer, but now I just think of myself as a perpetual bloomer. But I struggled a lot in my sort of late 20s with being on this path and realizing the path was not the path that I wanted to be on, that it brought me no joy. I was an educator in the brick and mortar system at that time, teaching high school English. And I retired and went to work at the racetrack and became a gallop boy and exercised racehorses for 10 years. But I think a lot of it is being able to let go of other people's expectations for us and the shaming that can come along. And I'm just wondering, was your revelation a light bulb moment? Was it a gradual dawning? Was it not wanting to throw, good money away after bad, or time you've invested all these years in becoming a lawyer? And of course, I'm sure you recognize now that those skills, you're still using them on different levels, even as you've shifted. But I guess I'm really wanting to know what prompted your breakthrough moment. Was it going back to live with your parents in Indiana, or I'm just really curious about that.
And that's a really good question. I think I always knew, right? I always knew that something was amiss. And by that, what I mean is, in law school, I ignored the fact, I just thought that, you're supposed to work hard and you're supposed to be frustrated perpetually. And that's just, it's the end game, right? So you deal with it. And so I did it 3 years, but then afterwards, I still had that feeling, right? And so that was there. And then when I reached the breaking point that led me to take the time off, I think that was the breakthrough moment, right? And it was a mixture of both the physical. I mean, I just couldn't sleep. My body was breaking down. When I say I drink, right, in order to deal with it. It wasn't not like I was an alcoholic, but I knew intuitively that I was trying to cope with a situation that was beyond me. And I remember going in to speak with my boss, the executive director at the time, and to tell her that I wanted to take the 5 months off. And I'm not going to lie to you, I vacillated at least 3 or 4 times before I entered her office that day, because what you said, I was trying to adhere or match the image that others had of me, or that I thought others had of me, right? And so finally, when I had a chance to speak with her and I told her, I'm burnt out. She's like, okay, right? So it made me realize that a lot of this stuff is just in our heads. It's bigger than we really make it. And that time away from home was critical because I was surrounded by family. I was surrounded by friends and stuff like that. But the turning point really was recognizing physically and mentally that I couldn't do anymore. And that at some point I was just gonna fall off the tracks, which is hard. It is hard to admit it. It's really hard.
Thank you. Joe, do we have any other final comments? This has been a wonderful discussion. And again, continue to chat, continue to tweet, continue to reflect. We also have the Google Doc available so that we can have this living document. But this is community. This is an opportunity for us to connect and to share. during this time, and I so appreciate all of the comments that everyone has said, but I do want to allow time for us to get up and to stretch at least, and to get ready for the next dynamic speaker. But let's all give Rashad a wonderful welcome. Rashad, yes, a wonderful round of applause.
Thank you all.
Thank you. I promised that I would not, we would not hold Rashad too long because he is on a 6-hour difference than us. So Rashad, if you do have to leave, we understand. However, most definitely, we hope that you all can reach out to Rashad. I did put your Twitter, Rashad, there so that folks can tweet out to you as well. So it is 2:10. Let's take a 5-minute stretch break, walk break, and then we'll come back and hear Dr. George. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paloma.
Rashad.
Yes.
I'm Jack.
Hey, Jack. Hey, how you doing, Jack?
I'm inspired by you following your soul.
Thank you.
And metaphorically putting on a new suit. and I'm a basketball player, retired. So I'm also intrigued that in order to get through a trial that you knew you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, you accessed your passion for playing ball. So aloha, and you have an inner peace that has been reflected here. And what I've done during this pandemic is I've looked to my dog. She's an emotional support animal, and her calmness has shown me that it's times like this that it's better to go inside oneself. So I really see how you've done that. I know what it's like because my parents are shut in and I talk to them every day, to lean back on family and your roots. And that's how I'm navigating this. And I just wanted to share that with you, and thank you for the good work you've done in the world. I did do some work with WFP in the past. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks, Jack. And let me just say this. I put together a different set of remarks in anticipation of this discussion, and they were much more logical, if you will. And so I'm glad that I decided to do something a little bit more personal, right?
Yeah. It takes the intimacy and puts it in place at a time when we're all one world. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha.
I think our willingness to do that, that takes courage.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Hey, Rashad, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
It's Jeremy Hayes from Tecumseh, Ontario.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hi. Yeah, nice to connect. Thank you for sharing. One question I have for you is food related, and so food is it's intertwined with how we create health for humanity, and also the abundance of food that we've created has also been it's been a factor in the increase in population globally. And I'm curious how you see the role of food in leading us towards balance, and maybe it's more so our relationship to food and our relationship to that growth that comes from the nutrition, growth individually and growth as a species.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking in my, again, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, and just to finish that, it's like, how can we live in balance so that we don't end up, over the carrying capacity of the planet and creating these systemic health challenges as a result?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a lot of questions. It's big questions. I'm going to say a lot, but big questions. I would say that and again, speaking in my personal capacity, not as WFP, I would say that one of the biggest issues is access. So we have the production, right? But it really comes down to ensuring equitable access to those who need it the most. That's part one. And that's where organizations like World Food Program, CARE International, UNICEF, and other institutions come into place to help facilitate access to nutritious food. Which leads to the second point, which is the food needs to be nutritious. It can't just be full of kilocalories that are not necessarily aligned with someone's health. So I think that's the second part of it. And I think that third, I think that what you're probably going to see is after this pandemic, or even during it, you're going to see people paying even closer attention to what they eat, how they feel, and making choices, again, not with respect to, not totally out of respect of how much food costs, but I think they're going to pay much more attention to the quality, as well as the impact that it has on them, right? Their digestion, their thinking, and so on and so forth. And I think the last question you asked was, it pertained to man's or human's relationship with food, if I recall correctly.
Yep. Yeah. How does that relationship with food need to change so that we can achieve balance and not just growth? It seems like we're just focused on growth.
And I think that's the key. I think you just hit the nail on the head. It comes back down to how you see food. Like in Italy, one of the great things about Italy is, and again, it's a stereotype, what I'm getting ready to say, but people enjoy their food. And so a food or a meal is more than what you eat. It's a way of bringing people together. It's a way for fellowship and communion. It is the time and energy that's invested in preparing food and cooking it. It reflects one's emotions and feelings for another person, right? And I think it's that kind of shift in thinking and mentality about food, which may help, right? So rather than going to TGI Fridays or McDonald's and getting that McRib, you can do that because it's cheap, but you're just like the words that we use, the food that we consume also has meaning, right? There's a story behind it, and so on and so forth. So I think it's going to require us to think more deeply and critically about that. What purposes does food serve?
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. This has just been a wonderful afternoon. I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chats, and it's very inspiring to hear and for everyone to connect in this way. So I'd like to now, I'm pleased to announce everyone today, but particularly